Hello, I'm Gloria Prest at Money Focus. I am a hypnotherapist and a counselor, and I also do talks and workshops about psychology. So basically, I'm trying to spread the knowledge about essential psychology for everyday life so that people's lives become a lot easier just by understanding. And today I'm going to talk about the basics of mental health. So when we talk about mental health, sometimes we really are thinking about being distressed, anxious, about painful emotions, about unpleasant things really. Mental health issues are not particularly nice. But in reality, if we think about mental health, is something that will affect everybody because everybody will suffer at some point in their life a degree of anxiety or overwhelm, low mood, depression. This is part of the human experience and is perfectly normal. Not pleasant, not desirable, but normal. Only when someone becomes stuck in one of these emotional states beyond what would be normal, we can say that the person suffers from a mental illness or a mental dysfunction, as I would prefer to say. Because what is really mental health? Mental health should really refer, as I believe, to the absence of illness in the mind. But often when we talk about mental health, we're really talking about mental illnesses. But to understand mental health as the health of the mind, we need first to understand what the mind is, because it's much more than just a physical brain, and it's not something which is sort of like esoteric, just out there. The mind really is a combination of the brain and the things that are held in the brain, which are thoughts, memories, beliefs, attitudes, and all that kind of thing, as well as reflexes and things that have been learned, knowledge, all of that that is stored in the brain, but is not actually the physical brain itself. And then it's the energy, because without energy, nothing in the body works and nothing in the brain will work. The um, neurons are constantly sparking energy. They are functioning through electricity. So the brain, what's in the brain? So the brain contains 100 billion neurons approximately. I'm sure nobody's counted them one by one. And it has trillions of connections between those neurons. But there are also 100 billion glial cells, or there approximately, there is a dispute about there right now, the right number. The glial cells are cells that are between the neurons and around neurons and in some way help to serve the needs of those cells. And then, of course, there are blood vessels and so on. So these bits here, sorry, can be said to be the hardware of the mind. So what's the software? The software is the programs that have been installed in us from birth. And it's all the information that is stored on the brain, including automatic reflexes, including beliefs about the world, beliefs about the self, includes attitudes and mindsets and knowledge and memories. And there are different kinds of memory. There is a biographical memory, and that doesn't start till we are approximately around the age of 3. Before that, children do have memories, but they're not a memory that could exactly say what is that happens. The memory is imprinted in the emotional centers, imprinted into their bodies, but not in a way that they can describe exactly what it is that happened before a certain age. They're procedural memories. We know how to do things. We know how to ride the bike. We know how to walk without having to think what muscles to move. We have retrospective memory, which is looking backwards, and prospective memory, memory of the things that we need to think or to do or looking forward. Those are some of the kinds of memories that we have. So are we talking about illness or talking about dysfunction? Because I believe that most mental illnesses, not all, but most mental illnesses would be described better as temporary mental dysfunctions because they're not caused by a virus or a bacteria. And with the right help, they can return to normal, healthy functioning. Therefore, I think that there are non-healthy mental health conditions or mental dysfunctions or whatever it is. I prefer those to the word mental illness. If you talk about illness, perhaps you could talk about some things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, dementia, and psychopathy, which have got a physical difference in the brain or a physical discompensation of hormones or whatever it is. That happens in the brain. For example, schizophrenia, the scans of the brains of people with schizophrenia tend to be different from people who have not. Bipolar disorder is a different kind of, you might have a normal brain, but there is something that causes this high intensity of very elated states of mind, very hyper, very happy, extremely creative, and then these huge dips into despair and depression, and it's a cycle, it's continue swinging from one to the other. Then you have dementia, which is actually damage to the fabric of the brain. And psychopathy I mentioned there because someone who's a real psychopath is because they don't have the ability to feel fear. The part of the brain where the fear would reside is either not there or it is damaged, and therefore that's why they don't feel fear, they don't feel compassion for people because they don't know what fear is. They have no ability to feel the empathy for other people. So those are some of the non-healthy conditions that you can say could be possibly considered biological or illnesses. But then we have the functional acquired, which is you may acquire anxiety, you may acquire depression, phobias, narcissism through the way that the world has treated you, through what's happened to you in life, through traumatic events, through depression, particularly through sheer exhaustion. When your body can't take it anymore, then you get depressed because you have to stop doing things and you need to rest by force. And then we have things like this functional neurological, which, for example, people on the autistic spectrum disorder, the brains are not sort of damaged, but they are wired differently. The sensory information might be different from the sensory information that people who are not on the spectrum may have, and they have some difficulties in understanding the world as other people, because if the information they get is different, then their understanding will be quite different. And they can be, there is a very wide spectrum. So it can be somebody who's very severe, and somebody who's very, very high functioning, but still they will have a different kind of wiring in the brain, a different kind of connections between the cells. Sometimes they have an over connectivity, too many connections, and it makes it quite difficult for them to filter out information that is not relevant. So they have overwhelming amount of sensory input and sensory information. Then you have OCD, which is like this repetition, this getting stuck on some continuous sort of recurrent intrusive thoughts. And then there's people who have these obsessive thoughts, but they don't have compulsion. There's people who have obsessive thoughts, and then to cope with the obsessive thoughts, they have a compulsion to do something in the hope that would reduce the obsession, but in fact what it does is perpetuate it. That seems to be like someone stuck in a loop, which is different from being anxious. Although they have huge amounts of anxiety, there is something in their mind that loops over and over again. But there is help for that, as there is from almost everything. And then there is Tourette's again, where there is some sort of short circuit or something that keeps repeating these actions or these tics or these words that are just completely out of control of the conscious part of the mind of the person. So these are some of the conditions. Of course, there are many more. There's, but just to give you an example. So, what causes most conditions? Most conditions are the consequence. The people who most, if we go back to this one, most people in life will have some experience of these, not necessarily narcissism, although they might experience being too close to a narcissist, but these sort of phobias, depressions, anxieties, lack of trust in the world, all these sort of things that just is for something that they've acquired through their experiences in life. And also some, people might be on the spectrum or have some obsessive tendencies, but the majority are the things that are acquired through experiences in life. Sometimes it can be from traumatic events, from recent ones, to trauma in childhood, much more further back in time. Sometimes from wrong beliefs clashing with the reality of the world, and that creates too much distress. Sometimes from excessive self-criticism and this constant negative self-view, that is one of the causes of huge amounts of distress, of mental distress. And often things, particularly like depression, are caused by prolonged or chronic stress, eventually leads to absolute depletion of all resources and depression. So are these conditions hereditary? Some conditions may have a genetic origin or original component. It is true that some conditions do run in families, and higher sensitivity to anxiety, for example, can be passed on during pregnancy if the mother is highly anxious during pregnancy. The hormones, the stress hormones that circulate through the mother's blood will actually circulate through the baby as well and prime the baby to be more prone to anxiety, although it's not determinant. And the effect of severe trauma has been found out now. They can be passed down from previous generations. So there's been research that shows that people who without any particular traumatic event in their life have symptoms of PTSD, and they've been found that actually in their previous generations they've been perhaps in concentration camps, or they've been through war events or really serious traumatic events. Now, however, mostly what is inherited in families is not genetic. It is learned behaviors, ways of thinking that have been picked up in early childhood and have been absorbed into the subconscious mind without being aware of it. For example, depressive ways of thinking or anxious ways of thinking, which are not in proportion to the reality. And the good news is that mental states are not fixed. The mind is adaptable to change. Most mental health issues can be overcome with support and of talking therapies. There is a growing number of non-medication therapies that can help even with severe conditions as PTSD. So there is plenty of hope out there. So understanding is the key. I honestly believe, and that's what I do these presentations, is that understanding how the mind works helps to make the right choices and maintain mental health. If you understand the mechanisms of your condition, if you have any, then you can understand what triggers it, and you can understand how to avoid it and how to come out of it if you enter into that state. So mental health is not about being constantly happy. It's about having the mental resources and mental resilience to cope with life's challenges in a balanced way. So that is what being mentally healthy should be. To have the resources, the resilience to manage whatever comes your way without throwing you off balance long term in a really negative emotional state. So for people who want to know more, who might have an issue or might want to learn more, if they want to contact me, if you have an issue you want to discuss, for example, I can offer you free 30-minute phone consultation, and this is my information here, or you can email me at gloria.press@hotmail.com or gloria@mindingfocus.co.uk, or alternatively you can phone me or look at my website. So thank you for listening.